The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Sir Oliver Sacks. Cupid's Disease. A bright woman of 90, Natasha K, recently came to our clinic. Soon after her 88th birthday, she said she noticed a change. What sort of change? We inquired. Delightful, she exclaimed. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I felt more energetic, more alive. I felt young once again. I took interest in the young men. I started to feel, you might say, frisky. Yes, frisky. This was a problem? No, not at first. I felt well, extremely well. Why should I think anything was the matter? And then? My friends started to worry. First they said, you look radiant and you lead some life. But then they started to think it wasn't quite appropriate. You were always so shy, they said. And now you're a flirt. You giggle. You tell jokes. At your age, is that right? And how do you feel? I was taken aback. I've been carried along, and it didn't occur to me to question what was happening. But then I did. I said to myself, you're 89, Natasha. This has been going on for a year. You were always so temperate in feeling, and now this extravagance. You're an old woman, nearing the end. What could justify such a sudden euphoria? And as soon as I thought of euphoria, things took a new convulsion. You're sick, my dear, I said to myself. You are feeling too well. You have to be ill. Ill? Emotionally? Mentally ill? No, not emotionally, physically ill. It was something in my body, my brain. It was making me high, and then I thought, God damn it, it's cuboid's disease. Cuboid's disease, I echoed. Blankly, I had never heard of the term before. Yes, cuboid's disease, syphilis, you know. I was in Brussels, in Saloniki. Nearly 17 years ago, I caught syphilis. Lots of the girls had it. We called it cuboid's disease. My husband saved me, took me out. Had it treated. It was years before penicillin, of course. Could it have caught up with me after all these years? There may be an immense latent period between the primary infection and the advent of neurosyphilis, especially if the primary infection has been suppressed, not eradicated. I had one patient treated with salvarsan by Ehrlich himself, who developed tabes dorsalis, one form of neurosyphilis, more than 50 years ago. But I had never heard of an interval of 70 years, nor of a self-diagnosis of cerebral syphilis mooted so calmly and clearly. That's an amazing suggestion, I replied after some thought. I would never have occurred to me, but perhaps you're right. She was right. The spinal fluid was positive. She did have neurosyphilis. It was indeed the spirochetes stimulating her ancient cerebral cortex. Now the question of treatment arose. But here another dilemma presented itself, propounded with typical acuity. But Mrs. K herself, I don't know that I want to treat it, she said. I know it's an illness, but it's made me feel well. I have enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. I won't deny it. It made me feel livelier, friskier than I have in 20 years. It's been fun. But I know when a good thing goes too far and stops being good. I have had thoughts, I have had impulses, I won't tell you which are, well, embarrassing and silly. It was like being a little tiddly, a little tipsy at first, but if it goes any farther, she memed a drolling, spastic dement. I guess I had cuboids, that's why I came to you. I don't want it to get worse. That would be awful, but I don't want it cured. It would be just as bad. I wasn't fully alive until the Wrigley's got me. Do you think you could keep it just as it is? We thought for a while, and of course, mercifully, was clear We have given her penicillin, which has killed the spirochetes, but can do nothing to reverse the cerebral change, the disinhibition they have caused. And now Mrs. K has in both ways, enjoying a mild disinhibition, a release of thought and impulse, without any threat to her self-control or further damage to her cortex. She hopes to live thus reanimated, rejuvenated to 100. Funny thing, she says, you have got to give it to cuboid. Postscript. Very recently, January 1985, I have seen some of these same dilemmas and ironies in relation to another patient, Miguel O, admitted to the state hospital with a diagnosis of mania, but soon realized to be suffering from the excited stage of neurocephalus. Simple man, he had been a farmhand in Puerto Rico, and with some speech and hearing impediment, he couldn't express himself too well in words, but expressed himself, exhibited his situation, simply and clearly in drawings. The first time I saw him, he was quite excited, and when I asked him to copy a symbol figure, he produced with the great brio a three-dimensional elaboration, so I took it to be until he explained that it was an open carton, and then tried to draw some fruit in it. Impulsively inspired by his excited imagination, he had ignored the circle and the cross, but retained and made concrete the idea of enclosure, an open carton, a carton full of oranges. Was that not more exciting, more alive, more real than my dull figure? A few days later I saw him again, very energized, very active, thoughts and feeling of flying everywhere, high as a kit. I asked him again to draw the same figure, and now, impulsively, without pausing for a moment, he transferred the original to a sort of trapezoid, allozogny, and then attached to it a string and a boy flying a kit. Kits flying, he exclaimed excitedly. I saw him for the third time a few days after that, and found him rather down, rather Parkinsonian. He had been given Halidol to quiet him, while awaiting final tests on the spinal fluid. Again I asked him to draw the figure, and this time he copied it dully, correctly, and a little smaller than the original, the micrographia of Halidol, and with none of the elaborations, the animation, the imagination of the others. I don't see things anymore, he said. It looked so real, looked so alive before. Well, everything seems dead when I'm treated. The drawing of the patients with Parkinson as they are awakened by L-DOPA form an instructive analogy. Asked to draw a tree, the Parkinsonians tend to draw a small, meager thing, stunted, impoverished, a bare winter tree with no foliage at all. As he warms up, comes to, is animated with L-DOPA, so the tree acquires vigor, life, imagination, and foliage if he becomes too excited, high on L-DOPA. The tree may acquire a fantastic ornates and exuberance, exploding with the florence of new branches and foliage with little arabesque, curlicks, and whatnot, until finally its original form is completely lost beneath this numerous, disparate elaboration. Such drawings are also rather characteristic of Tart's the original form, the original thought, lost in a jungle of embellishment and in the so-called speed art of amphetamines. First the imagination is awakened, then excited, frenzied, to endless and excess. What a paradox! What a cruelty! What an irony there is here! That inner life and imagination may lie dull and dormant unless released, awakened by an intoxication or disease. Precisely this paradox lies at the heart of the awakenings. It is responsible too for the seduction of touts, see chapter 10 and 14. No doubt for the peculiar uncertainty which may attach to a drug like cocaine, which is known like L-dopa, or touts to raise the brain's dopamine. Thus Freud's startling comment about cocaine that the sense of well-being and euphoria it induced in no way differs from the normal euphoria of a healthy person. In other words, you are simply normal, and it's soon hard to believe that you are under the influence of any drug. The same paradoxical violation may attach to electrical stimulation of the brain. There are epilepsies which are exciting and addictive, and may be self-induced repeatedly by those who are prone to them, as rats with implanted cerebral electrodes compulsively stimulate the pleasure centers of their own brain. But there are other epilepsies which bring peace and genuine well-being. A wellness can be genuine even if caused by an illness, and such a paradoxical wellness may even confer lasting benefit, as with Mrs. O.C. and her strange convulsive reminiscence. Chapter 15. We are in strange waters here, where all the usual considerations may be reversed, where illness may be wellness, and normality illness, where excitement may be either bondage or release, and where reality may lie in obscurity, not sobriety. It's the very realm of Cupid and Dionysus. 12. A matter of identity. What will it be today? He says, rubbing his hands. Haifa Bond of Virginia, a nice piece of Nova. Evidently he saw me as a customer. He would often pick up the phone in the ward and say, Thompson's delicacies? Oh, Mr. Thompson, I exclaimed, and who do you think I am? Good heavens, the light's bad. I took you for a customer. As if it's not my old friend, Tom Bitkins, me and Tom, he whispers in an aside to the nurse, was always going to the races together. Mr. Thompson, you are mistaken again. So I am, he rejoins, not bought out for a moment. Why would you be wearing white coat if you were Tom? You are Haim, the kosher butcher next door. No blood stains on your coat, though. Business bad today. You will look like a slaughterhouse by the end of the week. Feeling a bit swept away myself in this whirlpool of identities, I fingered the stethoscope dangling from my neck. A stethoscope, he exploded. And you pretending to be Haim. You mechanics are all starting to fancy yourselves to be doctors. What was your white coats and stethoscopes? As if you need a stethoscope to listen to a car. So you're my old friend Manners from the mobile station up the block. Come in to get your bowling and Ray. William Thompson rubbed his hands again, in his salesman groceries gesture, and looked for the counter. Not finding it, he looked at me strangely again. Where am I? He said, with a sudden scared look. I thought I was in the shop. Doctor, my mind must have wandered. You will, he wanting my shirt off to sound me as usual. No, not the usual. I'm not your usual doctor. Indeed you're not. I could see that straight away. You're not my usual chest-thumping doctor, and by God, you have a beard. You look like a Sigmund Freud. Have I gone bunker round the bend? No, Mr. Thompson, not round the bend. Just a little trouble with your memory. Difficulties remember and recognizing people. My memory has been playing some tricks, he admitted. Sometimes I make mistakes. I take somebody for someone else, but what will it be now, Nova or Virginia? So it would happen with variations every time, with improvisations, almost prompt, often funny, sometimes brilliant, and ultimately tragic. Mr. Thompson would identify me, misidentify me, pseudo-identify me as a dozen different people in the course of 5 minutes. He would whirl fluently from one guess, one hypothesis, one belief to the next, without any appearance of uncertainty at any point. He never knew who I was, or what and where he was. An ex-grocer with a severe Korsakoff's in a neurological institution. He remembered nothing. For more than a few seconds, he was continually disoriented. A bias of amnesia continually opened beneath him. But he would bridge them, nimbly by fluent confabulations and fictions of all kind. For him, they were not fictions, but how he suddenly saw or interpreted the world. Its radical flux and incoherence would not be tolerated, acknowledged, for an instant. There was instead this strange, delirious quasi-coherence. As Mr. Thompson with his ceaseless, unconscious, quick-fire inventions continually improvised a world around him, an Arabian Nights world, a phantasmagoria, a dream of ever-changing people, figures, situations, continual kaleidoscopic mutations and transformations. For Mr. Thompson, however, it was not a tissue of ever-changing evidence, fancies, and illusions, but a wholly normal, stable, and factual world. So far as he was concerned, there was nothing the matter. On one occasion, Mr. Thompson went for a trip, identifying himself at the front desk as the Reverend William Thompson, ordering a taxi and taking off for the day. The taxi driver, whom he later spoke to, said he had never had so fascinating a passenger, for Mr. Thompson told him one story after another, amazing personal stories full of fantastic adventures. He seemed to have been everywhere, done everything, met everyone. I could hardly believe so much was possible in a single life, he said. It's not exactly a single life, we answered. It's all very curious, a matter of identity. A very similar story related by Laura in the Neuropsychology of Memory, 1976, in which the spellbound cab driver only realized that his exotic passenger was ill when he gave him for a fare a temperature chart he was holding. Only then did he realize that this Scheherazade, the spinner of 1001 tales, was one of those strange patients at the neurological institution. Jimmy G, another Korsakoff patient whom I have already described at length, chapter 2, had long since cooled down from his actual acute Korsakoff syndrome and seemed to have settled into a state of permanent lostness, or perhaps a permanent new seeming dream or reminiscence of the past. But Mr. Thompson, only just out of hospital, his Korsakoff has exploded just 3 weeks before, and when he developed high fever, raved, and ceased to recognize all his family, was still on the boil, was still in an almost frenzied confabulatory delirium, of the sort sometimes Korsakoff psychosis, though it's not a really psychosis at all, continually creating a world in self to replace what was continually being forgotten and lost. Such a frenzy may call forth quite brilliant powers of invention and fancy, a veritable confabulatory genius, for such a patient must literally make himself and his world up every moment. We have, each of us, a life story, an inner narrative, whose continuity, whose sense in our lives. It might be said that each of us constructs and lives a narrative, and that this narrative is us, our identities. If we wish to know about man, we ask what's his story, his real inmost story. For each of us is a biography, a story. Each of us is a singular narrative, which is constructed continuously, unconsciously, by, through, and in us, through our perceptions, our feelings, our thoughts, our actions, and not least our discourse, our spoken narrations. Biologically, physiologically, we are not so different from each other. Historically, as narrative, we are each of us unique. To be ourselves, we must have ourselves. Possesses, if need be, repossessed our life stories. We must recollect ourselves, recollect the inner drama, the narrative of ourselves. A man needs such a narrative, a continuous inner narrative to maintain his identity, his self. This narrative need perhaps is the clue to Mr. Thompson's desperate tale-telling, his verbosity, deprived of a continuity. A man needs such a narrative, a continuous inner narrative, to maintain his identity, his self. This narrative need, perhaps, is a clue to Mr. Thompson's desperate tale-telling, his verbosity, deprived of continuity, of a quiet, continuous inner narrative. He is driven to a sort of narrational frenzy, hence his ceaseless tales, his confabulations, his misomania. Unable to maintain a genuine narrative or continuity, unable to maintain a genuine inner world, he is driven to the proliferation of pseudo-narratives, in a pseudo-continuity, pseudo-worlds peopled by pseudo-people, phantoms. What's like for Mr. Thompson? Superficially, he comes over as an ebullient comic. People say he is a poet, and there is much that is fragile in such a situation, which might form the basis of a comic novel. Indeed, such a novel has been written shortly after The Lost Mariner, Chapter 2 was published. A young writer named David Gleman sent me the manuscript of his book, Crowby Boy, the story of an amnesic like Mr. Thompson, who enjoys the wild and unbridled license of creating identities, new selves, as he whims, and as he must, an astonishing imagination of an amnesic genius, told with positively Joycean richness and gusto. I don't know whether it has been published. I am very sure it should be. I couldn't help wondering whether Mr. Gleman had actually met and studied at Thompson, as I have often wondered whether works, funds so uncannily similar to Laura's mnemonist may have been based on a personal encounter with such a mnemonist. It's comic, but not just comic, it's terrible as well. For here is a man who, in some sense, is desperate, in a frenzy. The world keeps disappearing, losing meaning, vanishing, and he must seek meaning, make meaning in a desperate way, continually inventing, throwing bridges of meaning over abysses of meaninglessness. The chaos that joins continually beneath him. But does Mr. Thompson himself know this, feel this? After finding him a poet, a laugh, loads of fun, people are disquieted, even terrified, by something in him. He never stops. They say he is like a man in a race, a man trying to catch something which always eludes him. And indeed he can never stop running, for the breach in memory, in existence, in meaning is never healed, but has to be bridged, to be patched, every second. And the bridges, the patches, for all their brilliance, fail to work, because they are confabulations, fictions, which can do serve for reality, while also failing to correspond with reality. Does Mr. Thompson feel this? Or, again, what is his feeling of reality? Is he in a torment all the while? The torment of a man lost in unreality, struggling to rescue himself, by sinking himself, by ceaseless inventions, illusions, themselves quite unreal. Is it certain he is not at ease? There is a tense, taut look on his face all the time, as of a man under ceaseless inner pressure, and occasionally, not too often, or masked if present, a look of open, naked, pathetic bewilderment. What saves Mr. Thompson in a sense, and in another sense damns him, is the forced or defensive superficiality of his life, the way in which it is, in effect, reduced to a surface, brilliant, shimmering, iridescent, ever-changing, but for all that a surface, a mass of illusions, a delirium without depths. And with this, no feeling that he has lost feeling, for the feeling he has lost, no feeling that he has lost the depth, the unfathomable, mysterious, myriad livid depth which somehow defines identity or reality. This strikes everyone who has been in contact with him for any time, that under his fluency, even his frenzy, is a strange loss of feeling. That feeling, or judgment which distinguishes between real and unreal, true and untrue. One can't speak of lies here, only of non-truth. Important and trivial, relevant or irrelevant. What comes out tormentally in his ceaseless confabulations has, finally, a peculiar quality of indifference, as if it didn't really matter what he said, or what anyone else did or said, as if nothing really mattered anymore. A striking example of this was presented one afternoon when William Thompson, jabbering away, of all sorts of people who were improvised on the spot, said, "And there goes my younger brother, Bob," past the window, in the same excited but even and indifferent tone as the rest of his monologue. I was dumbfounded when, a minute later, a man begged round the door and said, "I am Bob. I am his younger brother. I think he saw me passing by the window." Nothing in William's tone or manner, nothing in his exuberant but unvarying and indifferent style of monologue had prepared me for the possibility of reality. William spoke of his brother. He was real. In precisely the same tone, or lack of tone, in which he spoke of the unreal. And now, suddenly, out of the phantoms, a real figure appeared. Further, he didn't treat his younger brothers as real, didn't display any real emotions, was not in the least oriented or delivered from his delirium, but on the contrary, instantly treated his brother as unreal, effacing him, losing him in a further world of delirium. Utterly different from the rare but profoundly moving times when Jimmy J. Chapter 2 met his brother, and while with him was unlost. This was intensely disconcerting to poor Bob, who said, "I am Bob, not Rob, not Dob," to no avail whatever. In the midst of confabulations, perhaps some strand of memory, of remembered kinship or identity, was still holding or come back from an instant. William spoke of his elder brother, George, using his invariable present indicative tense. "But George died 19 years ago," said Bob, aghast. George is always the joker," William quipped, apparently ignoring or indifferent to Bob's comment, and went on blathering of George in his excited, dead way, insensitive to truth, to reality, to property, to everything. Insensitive, too, to the manifest distress of the living brother before him. It was this which conceived me, above everything, that there was some ultimate and total loss of inner reality, of feeling and meaning, of soul in William, and led me to ask the sisters, as I had asked them of Jimmy J., "Do you think William has a soul? Or has he been bithed, scooped out, desouled by disease?" This time, however, they looked worried by my question, as if something of the sort were already in their minds. They couldn't say, "Judge for yourself, see William in chapel," because his Wisecracking, his confabulation continued even there. There is an utter bathos and a sad sense of lostness with Jimmy J which one doesn't feel or feel directly with the effervescent Mr. Thompson. Jimmy has moods, and a sort of brooding, or at least yearning, sadness, a depth, a soul which doesn't seem to be present in Mr. Thompson. Doubtless, as the sister said, he had a soul, an immortal soul, in the theological sense, could be seen and loved as an individual by the Almighty. But they agreed something very disquieting had happened to him, to his spirit, his character, in the ordinary human sense. It's because Jimmy is lost that he can be redeemed or found, at least for a while, in the mood of a genuine emotional relation. Jimmy is in despair, a quiet despair, to use or adapt Kierkegaard's term, and therefore he has the possibility of salvation, of touching base, the ground of reality, the feeling and meaning he has lost, but still recognizes, still yearns for. But for William, with his brilliant, brassy surface and unending joke, which he substitutes for the world, which if it covers over a desperation in a desperation he doesn't feel, for William, with his manifest indifference to relation and reality caught in unending verbosity, there may be nothing redeeming at all. His confabulations, his aberrations, his frantic search for meaning, being the ultimate barrier to any meaning. Paradoxically, then, William's great gift for confabulation, which has been called out to leap continually over the over-opening abyss of amnesia. William's great gift is also his damnation. If only he could be quiet. One feels for an instant, if only he could stop the ceaseless chatter and jabber, if only he could relinquish the deceiving surface of illusions. Then, oh, then, reality might seep in. Something genuine, something deep, something true, something felt could enter his soul. For it is not memory which is the final, existential casualty here. Although his memory is wholly devastated, it's not memory only which has been so altered in him, but some ultimate capacity for feeling which is gone. And this is the sense in which he is desouled. Laura speaks of such indifference as equalization, and sometimes seems to see it as the ultimate pathology, the final destroyer of any world, any self, if exerted, I think, a horrified fascination on him, as well as constituting an ultimate therapeutic challenge. He was thrown back to his theme again and again, sometimes in relation to Korsakoff's and memory, as in the neuropsychology of memory, more often in relation to frontal lobe syndromes, especially in human brain and psychological processes, which contains several full-length case histories of such patients, full comparable in their terrible coherence and impact to the man with a shattered world. Comparable and, in a way, more terrible still, because they depict patients who don't realize that anything has befallen them, patients who have lost their own reality without knowing it, patients who may not suffer, but the most God-forsaken for all. Zastisky, in The Man with the Shattered World, is continuously described as a fighter, always, even passionately, conscious of his state, and always fighting, with the tenacity of the damned, to recover the use of his damaged brain. But William, like Laura's frontal lobe patients, is so damned he doesn't know he's damned. For it's not just a faculty or some faculties which are damaged, but the very citadel, the self, the soul itself. William is lost, in this sense, far more than Jamie. For all his bravos, one never feels, or rarely feels, that there is a person remaining, whereas in Jimmy there is a plainly a real, moral being, even if disconnected most of the time. In Jimmy, at least, reconnection is possible. The symbiotic challenge can be summed up as only connect. Our efforts to reconnect William all failed, even increase his confabulatory pressure. But when he abdicated our efforts and let him be, he sometimes wanders out into the quiet and undemanding garden which surrounded the home. There, in its quietness, he recovers his own quiet, the presence of others. Other people excite and rattle him, force him into an endless, frenzied social chatter, a veritable delirium of identity-making and seeking the present of plants, quite guarding the non-human order, making no social or human demands upon him, allow his identity delirium to relax, to subside, and by making no social or human demands upon him, allows this identity and by their quiet non-human self-sufficiency and completeness allow him a rare quietness and self-sufficiency of his own, by offering, beneath and or beyond, all merely human identities and relations, a deep, wordless communion with nature itself. With this, the restored sense of being in the world, being real.